The emergency call came in at 11:30 at night, just as Mike Rodriguez was finishing his dinner of cold pizza and warm beer. Water was flooding the basement of Warehouse 17 in the old industrial district, and nobody else wanted to take the job. The place had been empty for 3 years, ever since the mining company pulled out and left half the colony without work. Mike grabbed his toolkit and headed out into the rain. New Terra Colony never slept completely, but this part of town came pretty close. Broken streetlights cast weird shadows between the empty buildings, and his truck's headlights seemed to make everything look worse instead of better. Warehouse 17 looked like all the others on the block. Big, gray, and falling apart. The front door hung open, creaking in the wind. Mike pulled on his waterproof boots and clicked on his flashlight. The sound of rushing water echoed from somewhere deep inside the building. The main floor was empty, except for some old crates and a family of rats that scattered when his light hit them. Mike found the stairs to the basement and started down. The water was ankle-deep at the bottom, flowing fast toward a drain that was obviously blocked with years of trash and debris. Following the sound of the burst pipe, Mike waded through the murky water toward the back corner of the basement. His flashlight beam swept across old machinery, rusted pipes, and piles of junk that previous owners had left behind. The pipe had burst near the foundation wall, sending a steady stream of water across the floor. Mike set down his toolkit and started examining the damage. It was a simple fix, really. The old pipe had finally given up after years of freezing and thawing. He could have it patched in 20 minutes and be home before midnight. That was when he heard it. A soft sound, almost like a kitten crying, coming from behind a pile of broken concrete and twisted metal near the far wall. Mike stopped working and listened. There it was again. Weak and pitiful. Setting down his wrench, Mike made his way carefully toward the sound. The pile of debris was taller than he was, chunks of concrete and pieces of old equipment stacked against the wall. Something was definitely back there, and it sounded hurt. Mike started moving the smaller pieces of rubble, being careful not to bring the whole pile down on himself. The crying sound got louder as he worked. Finally, he moved aside a large chunk of concrete and saw what was making the noise. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. About the size of a house cat, but clearly not a cat. The creature had 4 legs, small wings, and was covered in what looked like scales. Its eyes were closed, and it was breathing in short, painful gasps. One wing was torn and bleeding, and its scales looked dull and patchy, like it had been sick for a long time. Mike stared at it for a long moment. He had heard stories about dragons. Of course, everyone in the galaxy had. Massive creatures that could destroy entire planets, apex predators that other species feared above all else. But this thing was tiny and clearly dying. The creature opened its eyes and looked at him. They were golden like pieces of sunlight and filled with pain and exhaustion. It tried to lift its head but could barely manage it. A small sound came from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper. Mike looked around at the debris pile and realized what had happened. Adult dragons had been here, probably using the abandoned warehouse as a temporary shelter. When they left, they had left this one behind. The pile of rubble had probably been its attempt to hide and stay warm. Every reasonable part of Mike's brain told him to walk away. Dragons were dangerous, even baby dragons. The colony had strict rules about contact with predator species. If the authorities found out he had even seen one and not reported it immediately, he could lose his job, maybe even be deported back to Earth. But looking at the tiny creature struggling to breathe, Mike could not bring himself to care about rules and regulations. It was hurt and alone and probably had not eaten in days. He thought about his own son back on Earth, how small and helpless kids could be, and made his decision. Mike took off his work jacket, a heavy canvas thing that was already soaked from the basement water. Moving slowly and speaking softly, he reached toward the creature. It watched him with those golden eyes but did not try to run or fight. Maybe it was too weak, or maybe it somehow understood that he was trying to help. The creature was surprisingly light when Mike picked it up. Its body felt hot against his hands like it had a fever. He wrapped it carefully in his jacket, making sure not to hurt the injured wing. The creature made a soft sound and seemed to relax a little. Dot. Standing up, Mike realized he had no idea what he was supposed to do next. The creature needed medical help, that was obvious, but where could he take it? The colony's animal clinic only treated Earth animals and a few common alien pets. The research center might know more about dragons, but they would probably want to study it rather than heal it. Dot. The creature shifted in his arms and made another soft sound. Its breathing was getting weaker, and Mike could feel how hot it was, even through his jacket. Whatever he was going to do, he needed to do it fast. Mike waded back through the basement water, the burst pipe forgotten. His truck was still running outside, windshield wipers fighting against the rain. He settled the wrapped creature on the passenger seat, where it lay still and quiet. Dot. Starting the engine, Mike tried to think of where to go. The medical center was closest, but they would probably refuse to treat an alien, especially a dragon. The research center was further away, but Dr. Wong there knew about different species. She might be willing to help, or at least tell him what the creature needed. As he drove through the empty streets, Mike kept glancing at the small bundle on the seat beside him. The creature's breathing was so shallow he could barely see its chest moving. He pressed a little harder on the gas pedal. Mike had no way of knowing that what he held in his truck was something the galaxy had never seen before. A dragon hatchling that had been shown kindness instead of abandonment. A creature that would grow up knowing love instead of only strength and violence. All he knew was that something small and helpless needed his help, and he was going to do everything he could to save it. The rain kept falling and Mike kept driving, carrying his strange passenger toward an uncertain future. The colony's lights grew brighter ahead, and Mike hoped someone somewhere would be willing to help a dying baby dragon and the plumber who refused to let it die alone. The medical center's automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss as Mike rushed through them, the small bundle in his arms barely moving now. The night shift nurse looked up from her desk, took one look at the soaked plumber in work boots, and frowned. "Sir, visiting hours ended at 9, she said, her voice tired and impatient. "If this is an emergency, you need to go to the main hospital across town." Mike stepped closer to the desk, adjusting his jacket around the creature. "This is an emergency. I found something that needs help, and I don't know where else to take it." The nurse's expression softened slightly when she saw how worried he looked. "What kind of something? Did you find an injured animal?" "We have a veterinary clinic that opens at 7 in the morning." "It can't wait that long," Mike said. He carefully pulled back a corner of his jacket, revealing the small dragon's pale scales and labored breathing. "Please, just look at it." The nurse's face went white. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's hurt," Mike said, ignoring her reaction. "It's been abandoned and it's sick. It needs medical attention right now." "Sir, you need to leave," the nurse said, her voice shaking. "Right now. We can't treat that here. We don't treat dragons. No one treats dragons." "It's just a baby," Mike protested. "Look at it, it's dying." The nurse was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling security. Dragons are a Class 5 predator species. Even juveniles are considered extremely dangerous. You should have contacted the authorities the moment you found it." Mike backed toward the doors as 2 security guards came running from the elevator. "Wait, just listen to me. It's sick and weak and it needs help." "Sir, please exit the building immediately," one of the guards said, his hand moving toward the weapon on his belt. Possession of a Class 5 predator without proper permits is a serious crime. The automatic doors slid shut behind Mike as he stepped back into the rain. The creature in his arms felt even hotter now, and its breathing had become a barely audible whistle. He looked back through the glass doors and saw the nurse still on her phone, probably calling the colony police. Mike ran to his truck and drove quickly away from the medical center. The research facility was on the other side of town, near the spaceport. Dr. Patricia Wong worked there and she knew about alien species. She had to help. The research center was a low, modern building surrounded by a chain-link fence. Mike parked near the main entrance and jogged through the rain to the night security window. The guard inside was reading something on his tablet and looked annoyed when Mike knocked on the glass. "We're closed," the guard called through the intercom. "Come back during business hours." "I need to speak to Dr. Wong," Mike said. "It's an emergency. I have a creature that needs immediate medical attention." The guard looked at him suspiciously. "What kind of creature?" Mike hesitated, then decided honesty was his only option. "A dragon. A baby dragon that's been abandoned and is dying." The guard's eyes widened. He picked up his phone and spoke quickly to someone, then looked back at Mike. "Dr. Wong is coming down. Don't move from that spot." A few minutes later, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes came to the door. Dr. Wong looked at Mike through the glass, then at the bundle in his arms, and slowly opened the door. "Let me see it," she said quietly. Mike carefully unwrapped the creature. In the bright lights of the research center entrance, it looked even worse than it had in the warehouse. Its scales were dry and cracked, its wing was still bleeding slowly, and its breathing was so shallow it was barely visible. Dr. Wong stared at the creature for a long moment, then looked up at Mike. "Where did you find this?" "Abandoned warehouse in the industrial district," Mike said. "Hidden under a pile of rubble. It looks like adult dragons left it behind when they moved on." "They do that," Dr. Wong said softly. "Dragons abandon weak offspring. It's part of their survival strategy. Only the strongest survive to adulthood." "But it's still alive," Mike said. "It's fighting. It wants to live." Dr. Wong looked at the creature again, then shook her head. "Mr. Rodriguez, dragons are not pets. They're not even really animals as we understand them. An adult dragon can destroy a small moon. Their brain chemistry is completely different from anything we know. They're living weapons." "This one isn't destroying anything," Mike said. "This one is dying." "Because it's supposed to die," Dr. Wong replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Dragons evolved this way for a reason. The weak ones die young so the strong ones have enough resources to reach their full potential. By saving it, you're fighting against millions of years of evolution." Mike felt anger rising in his chest. "So I should just let it die? Just because that's how things usually work?" "Yes," Dr. Wong said. "I know that sounds heartless, but you don't understand what you're dealing with. Even if this hatchling survives, it will grow up to be a creature capable of devastating entire star systems. Dragons don't form emotional bonds the way other species do. It won't remember your kindness. It won't care that you saved its life." The creature made a soft sound and shifted slightly in Mike's arms. Dr. Wong stepped back instinctively. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I can't help you. The research center doesn't treat dragons, and neither does anyone else in this sector of space. My advice is to let nature take its course." Mike stared at her for a moment, then carefully rewrapped the creature in his jacket. "Then I'll find someone who will help." As he walked back to his truck, Dr. Wong called after him. "Mike, there is nowhere to go. No one in the galaxy treats sick dragons. The closest thing to what you're looking for would be the Dragon Hospital on Sanctuary Station, but that's 3 systems away, and they only treat adult dragons with the resources to pay for their own care." Mike stopped and looked back. "Sanctuary Station? Don't even think about it," Dr. Wong said. "It's a 2-day journey through dangerous space and you'd never make it in time anyway. The hatchling will be dead within hours." Mike said nothing. He got in his truck and drove away, leaving Dr. Wong standing in the rain outside the research center. As he drove through the empty streets of New Terra Colony, Mike thought about what Dr. Wong had said. Everyone seemed to have the same answer. Let the creature die. It was natural. It was how things were supposed to work. But Mike had never been good at accepting how things were supposed to work, especially when how things were supposed to work seemed wrong. The creature stirred in its makeshift nest on the passenger seat. Its breathing was getting worse, and Mike could see it was running out of time. But Dr. Wong had mentioned Sanctuary Station. 3 star systems away, through dangerous space, but it was something. Mike had never piloted anything bigger than a maintenance shuttle, and he had never traveled beyond New Terra's solar system. But as he looked at the dying creature beside him, he realized he was probably going to try anyway. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the stupidest thing to do. Mike was beginning to think this might be one of those times. Mike stood in the cargo bay of the transportation depot at 4 in the morning, staring at his supervisor's personal cargo hauler. The ship was old but reliable, a mid-sized transport vessel that Bill Henderson used for his side business moving supplies between colonies. Bill kept the access codes written on a piece of tape stuck under his desk drawer. Because Bill was not the most security-conscious person in the galaxy, the creature, which Mike had started calling Ember because of its golden eyes, was wrapped in thermal blankets inside a small crate that Mike had modified with life support systems cobbled together from spare parts, an oxygen recycler from an old spacesuit, a heating element from a broken food processor, and a water recycling unit from a camping kit. It was not pretty, but it was keeping Ember alive for now. Mike had spent the last 4 hours researching everything he could find about dragons, space travel, and Sanctuary Station. The journey would take him through the edge of pirate territory and past a system known for solar storms. In a proper ship with experienced crew, it would be dangerous but doable. In a cargo hauler piloted by a plumber who had never left his home system, it was probably suicide. But Ember's breathing had gotten worse during the night, and Mike could see that his improvised life support system was failing. The creature needed real medical care, and Sanctuary Station was the only place in known space that might provide it. Mike loaded his supplies into the cargo hauler, food, water, spare parts, and every medical supply he could buy from the colony's emergency stores without raising suspicions. He had also cleaned out his savings account and taken a loan against his truck. If he survived this trip, he was going to be broke. If he did not survive, being broke would be the least of his problems. The ship's navigation computer was older than Mike, but it had the basic star charts he needed. Mike plotted a course to Sanctuary Station that would take him through the safest possible route, which was still not very safe at all. He would have to pass through the Broken Ring system, where pirates like to hide among the asteroid fields, and then navigate the Flux Nebula, where sensor readings were unreliable and ships sometimes disappeared without a trace. Mike strapped Ember's crate into the co-pilot's seat and ran through the pre-flight checklist. Everything seemed to be working, though the ship's reactor was running a little hot, and there was a persistent rattle somewhere in the engine compartment. Mike made a mental note to check that later. Assuming there was a later. The cargo hauler lifted off just as the sun was coming up over New Terra Colony. Mike had left a message on his supervisor's voicemail explaining that he had a family emergency and would be gone for a few days. It was not exactly a lie if you considered Ember family, which Mike was starting to do. The first day of the journey passed without major incident. Mike spent most of his time monitoring Ember's condition and trying to improve the life support system. The creature was still alive, but barely. Its breathing was so shallow that Mike sometimes had to check twice to make sure it was still there. Mike tried talking to Ember as he worked. He told stories about his life back on Earth, about his job on New Terra, about anything he could think of to fill the silence. He was not sure if dragons could understand human speech, but Ember seemed to relax a little when Mike was talking. Late in the first day, the ship's proximity alarm started beeping. Mike looked at the sensor display and saw 3 smaller ships moving to intercept his course. Pirates. They were coming from the direction of the asteroid belt, moving fast and with obvious hostile intent. Mike had never been in a space combat situation before, but he knew the basics. Pirates usually wanted cargo, not kills. If he cooperated and gave them what they wanted, they would probably let him go. The problem was that what they wanted was probably his ship, and without his ship, Ember would die. The lead pirate ship hailed him on the standard communication frequency. Cargo hauler, this is the vessel Razor's Edge. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Cooperate and nobody gets hurt. Mike looked at Ember's crate, then at the controls of the cargo hauler. The ship was not built for combat or high-speed maneuvers, but it was solidly constructed and had a few tricks that most pirates would not expect. Instead of cutting his engines, Mike pushed them to maximum power and dove toward the asteroid field. The cargo hauler shook and rattled as he pushed it beyond its normal operational limits, but it held together. The pirates followed, probably amused by what they saw as a desperate but futile escape attempt. They were flying smaller, faster ships that should have been able to catch the lumbering cargo hauler easily. What they did not expect was for Mike to know the asteroid field as well as he did. Years of working in tight spaces and navigating complex pipe systems had given Mike an unusual sense of three-dimensional space. He threaded the cargo hauler between asteroids that the pirate ships could not safely navigate, using the larger rocks as shields against their weapons. When one of the pirate ships tried to follow him through a particularly narrow gap between two spinning asteroids, Mike suddenly reversed his engines and changed course. The pirate ship, committed to its trajectory, slammed into the asteroid and exploded in a brief flash of light. The other two pirate ships backed off, apparently deciding that chasing one cargo hauler was not worth the risk of joining their companion as space debris. Mike emerged from the asteroid field and continued toward Sanctuary Station, his heart pounding and his hands shaking on the controls. The second day brought different challenges. The Flux Nebula scrambled the ship's sensors and navigation systems, forcing Mike to fly mostly by instinct and dead reckoning. Strange lights flickered outside the viewports, and the ship's hull groaned under the pressure of conflicting gravitational fields. Ember S condition worsened during the passage through the nebula. The creature's breathing became irregular, and its body temperature spiked even higher. Mike rigged up an emergency cooling system using ice packs from the ship's medical kit, but he could see that time was running out. When the cargo hauler finally emerged from the nebula, Mike was exhausted, and the ship was running on backup power. But ahead of him, growing larger on the main screen, was Sanctuary Station, a massive gleaming structure that looked like a cross between a space station and a hospital, with dozens of docking bays and the symbol of the Galactic Medical Service painted on its hull. Mike requested emergency docking clearance and was directed to a bay near the station's emergency medical center. As the cargo hauler settled onto the docking platform, Mike carefully lifted Ember's crate and ran toward the station entrance. He burst through the doors of the Dragon Hospital section, Ember's crate in his arms, looking wild and desperate. The reception area was quiet and sterile, with a few other patients waiting in chairs designed for much larger creatures. Behind the reception desk sat the largest being Mike had ever seen in person. Dr. Vera Stoneclaw was a full-grown dragon, her scales a deep emerald green and her eyes like liquid amber. She was easily 20 feet long even sitting down, and her presence filled the entire room. When she saw Mike with his small crate, Dr. Stoneclaw rose to her full height and stared down at him. "Human," she said, her voice like distant thunder. "What brings you to our medical facility?" Mike looked up at the enormous dragon and realized that everything he had done over the past 2 days had led to this moment. A human plumber standing before an ancient dragon, asking for help to save a creature that his own species had abandoned to die. "I have a sick baby dragon," Mike said, his voice barely steady, "and I don't know how to help it anymore." Dr. Stoneclaw's expression was unreadable as she looked down at the small crate in Mike's arms. Around the reception area, other patients and staff had stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented scene unfold. No human had ever brought a dragon hatchling to the Dragon Hospital. No member of any species had ever brought a dragon hatchling anywhere for medical treatment. It simply was not done. But Mike had done it anyway, and now he stood before Dr. Stoneclaw, hoping that somewhere in the vast galaxy there was still room for compassion over protocol. Dr. Stoneclaw moved with surprising grace for such a massive creature, her claws clicking softly against the polished floor as she approached Mike. Her amber eyes studied him with an intelligence that was both ancient and calculating. Around the reception area, other dragons and various alien species watched in stunned silence. "Show me," Dr. Stoneclaw said, her voice softer now but still carrying the weight of centuries. Mike carefully opened the crate and pulled back the thermal blankets. Ember lay motionless except for the barely visible rise and fall of his tiny chest. His scales had lost what little luster they once had, and his golden eyes were closed. The makeshift life support equipment Mike had rigged up was beeping weakly, showing readings that even he could tell were bad. Dr. Stoneclaw extended one massive claw and gently touched the side of Ember's neck, feeling for a pulse. Her expression changed as she examined the small creature, surprise flickering across her reptilian features. "This hatchling has been sick for weeks," she said, looking back at Mike. "How long have you had it?" "2 days," Mike replied. "I found it abandoned in a warehouse basement. It was hidden under rubble, probably left behind when the adults moved on." Dr. Stoneclaw's eyes widened slightly. "You found it 2 days ago and it is still alive? That should not be possible. A hatchling. This sick should have died within hours of being abandoned." She turned to one of the other medical staff, a smaller dragon with silver scales. "Prepare emergency treatment room 7. Full life support and diagnostic equipment. Now." As the medical team rushed to prepare, Dr. Stoneclaw looked back down at Mike. "Human, what you have done is unprecedented. No member of any species has ever attempted to save an abandoned dragon hatchling. Not even other dragons." "Why not?" Mike asked, following as Dr. Stoneclaw carried Ember toward the treatment rooms. "I mean, I know they abandon sick ones, but why doesn't anyone try to help them?" Dr. Stoneclaw was quiet for a moment as they walked through corridors lined with equipment designed for creatures much larger than humans. "Because it goes against every natural instinct we have developed over millions of years. Dragons abandon weak offspring so that the strong ones have enough resources to survive. It is not cruelty, human. It is necessity." They entered a treatment room filled with monitors and medical equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency. Dr. Stoneclaw gently placed Ember on an examination table that adjusted automatically to accommodate the small creature. Immediately, sensors began taking readings and displaying information on screens around the room. "But you tried anyway," Dr. Stoneclaw continued as she worked. "You saw a dying creature and decided to help it, despite not knowing what it was or how dangerous it might become. Why?" Mike watched as the medical team attached various monitoring devices to Ember. "I don't know. It was hurt and alone. It needed help. That seemed more important than anything else." Dr. Stoneclaw paused in her work and stared at Mike for a long moment. "More important than your own safety? More important than following the natural order of things? More important than the fact that this creature might one day be capable of destroying worlds?" "Yeah," Mike said simply. "I guess so." The silver-scaled dragon assisting with the treatment looked up from a diagnostic screen. "Doctor, you need to see these readings. The genetic markers are unusual." Dr. Stoneclaw moved to examine the screen, her expression growing more puzzled as she read the data. "This is impossible," she murmured. "Run the test again." While the medical team worked, Mike sat in a chair that was far too large for him and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, he had been a simple plumber fixing broken pipes and replacing water heaters. Now he was sitting in an alien hospital, watching dragon doctors try to save a creature that no one else in the galaxy would even touch. "Human, Doctor," Stoneclaw said, turning back to him. "What is your name?" "Mike Rodriguez." "Mike Rodriguez, I need to explain something to you about what you have brought here." Dr. Stoneclaw gestured toward the monitors surrounding Ember. "This hatchling carries a rare genetic condition that occurs in perhaps 1 in 10 million dragon births. It makes them physically weaker than their siblings, unable to compete for resources during the critical early development period." Mike felt his heart sink. "So there's nothing you can do? It's going to die anyway?" "On the contrary," Dr. Stoneclaw said, a strange note in her voice. "With proper medical treatment, hatchlings with this condition can survive and grow to adulthood, but they develop differently than normal dragons. They never reach the massive size and destructive power of their siblings. Instead, they develop enhanced intelligence, empathy, and other traits that we do not fully understand." The silver-scaled assistant spoke up. "Doctor, the neural activity readings are unlike anything in our database. The empathic centers of the brain are developing at an accelerated rate." Dr. Stoneclaw nodded slowly. "In our entire recorded history, no dragon with this genetic condition has ever survived to maturity. They have always been abandoned as hatchlings and died within days. This may be the first time anyone has seen what happens when such a creature receives care and affection during its critical development period." Mike looked at Ember, who was now breathing more steadily thanks to the advanced life support systems. "You mean no one knows what he'll become?" "We are in uncharted territory," Dr. Stoneclaw admitted. "But the preliminary readings suggest something remarkable. The neural pathways associated with emotional bonding and cross-species communication are developing at an unprecedented rate. It appears that the care you have shown during the past 2 days has triggered genetic expressions that we have never observed before." As if responding to the conversation, Ember stirred slightly and opened his golden eyes. For the first time since Mike had found him, the small dragon lifted his head and looked around the room. When his gaze found Mike, he made a soft chirping sound that seemed almost like recognition. Dr. Stoneclaw watched this interaction with growing amazement. "Extraordinary. Look at the neural activity spikes when it sees you. It has formed an attachment bond, something that should be impossible for a dragon of any age." Mike reached out carefully and let Ember sniff his hand. The small dragon nuzzled against his palm, a gesture that was startlingly similar to what a kitten or puppy might do. "What does this mean?" Mike asked. Dr. Stoneclaw was quiet for a long moment, studying the readings on her screens. "It means, Mike Rodriguez, that you may have created something that has never existed before in the galaxy. A dragon that bonds emotionally with another species. A dragon that feels love instead of only hunger and territorial instinct." Around the treatment room, the medical staff exchanged glances that mixed wonder with concern. They were witnessing something that would change everything they thought they knew about dragons. The genetic modifications appear to be permanent, the silver-scaled assistant reported. "Whatever changes have occurred in its neural development, they cannot be reversed." Mike gently stroked Ember's neck, and the small dragon made a contented sound that was completely unlike the fierce roars and growls typically associated with his species. "Is that bad?" Dr. Stoneclaw shook her head slowly. "I do not know. No one knows. You have stepped outside the natural order of the galaxy, and we cannot predict the consequences. But I can tell you one thing with certainty." She gestured toward the monitor showing Ember's vital signs, which were now strong and stable. "This hatchling will live. Not only live, but thrive. And as it grows, it will be unlike any dragon that has ever existed. It will remember your kindness, Mike Rodriguez. It will carry the memory of being saved when all others would have let it die." Mike looked down at Ember, who was now fully awake and alert, his golden eyes bright with intelligence and what could only be described as affection. "What happens now?" Dr. Stoneclaw smiled, an expression that was both beautiful and terrifying on such a massive predator. "Now you both return to your colony and show the galaxy that humans possess something that even we dragons have forgotten, the power to change the natural order through simple compassion." 3 weeks later, Mike sat in his workshop behind his apartment on New Terra Colony, watching Ember practice using a wrench. The small dragon had grown considerably since their return from Sanctuary Station, now about the size of a medium dog, but his development was unlike anything the galaxy's dragon experts had predicted. Instead of developing the aggressive territorial instincts typical of young dragons, Ember displayed an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. He would spend hours watching Mike repair equipment, his golden eyes following every movement as Mike explained what he was doing. Even more remarkably, Ember had begun to help, using his small but dexterous claws to hold tools or reach into tight spaces that Mike could not access. The colony's reaction to their return had been mixed. The local government had initially wanted to confiscate Ember as a dangerous predator, but Dr. Stoneclaw had sent detailed medical reports proving that this particular dragon posed no threat to anyone. The research center had offered to buy Ember for an enormous sum, wanting to study the unprecedented neural developments. Mike had politely declined. Some colonists were afraid and avoided Mike and Ember completely. Others were fascinated and came by regularly to see the dragon that had bonded with a human. Children especially were drawn to Ember, who seemed to enjoy their attention and was gentle with even the smallest ones. But it was the other changes that truly amazed everyone who knew about Ember's unique development. The small dragon had begun displaying abilities that no one could fully explain. There, Ember chirped, pointing with one claw toward Mike's tool cabinet. The sound was not quite speech, but Mike had learned to understand Ember's various vocalizations. Ember was indicating that Mike would need a specific wrench for the water heater they were working on. Mike looked at the tool cabinet, then at the water heater, then back at Ember. How did you know that? Ember made a complex series of sounds that Mike had come to recognize as Ember's equivalent of a shrug. The small dragon could not explain how he knew things any more than Mike could explain how he had known to save Ember in the first place. It was simply part of who they had become together. Dr. Wong from the research center had visited several times, documenting Ember's development and trying to understand the changes in his brain chemistry. Her latest theory was that the emotional bonding process had unlocked latent abilities that existed in dragon genetics but had never been activated before. It is as if dragons were meant to form these kinds of bonds, she had explained during her last visit, but millions of years of survival-based evolution suppressed those capabilities. Ember represents what dragons might have been if they had developed in a different environment. The communication device on Mike's workbench chimed with an incoming message. Mike wiped his hands on a rag and activated the screen. The face that appeared belonged to Captain Lisa Park of the merchant vessel Terra's Pride. Mike, we have a situation out here that I thought you and your partner might be able to help with, Captain Park said. We responded to a distress call from a survey ship near the edge of the system, but when we arrived, we found something unusual. There are 3 more abandoned dragon hatchlings here, and they are in bad shape. Mike and Ember both looked at the screen with interest. Over the past few weeks, word had spread throughout the local systems about the human who had saved a dragon. Other species had begun bringing their own abandoned or injured creatures to Mike, somehow believing that if he could save a dragon, he could save anything. The survey team found them in a cave on one of the outer moons. Captain Park continued. They have been abandoned for days, maybe longer. 2 of them are barely alive, and the third one is, well, it is acting strangely. It keeps making sounds toward empty space like it is trying to communicate with something that is not there. Mike looked at Ember, who had stopped playing with the wrench and was staring intently at the communication screen. The small dragon made a series of urgent chirping sounds that Mike had learned to recognize as excitement or concern. Ember thinks we should go, Mike said to Captain Park. Where exactly are you located? Captain Park transmitted the coordinates. It was a 2-day journey from New Terra, but Mike still had access to his supervisor's cargo hauler. Bill Henderson had been surprisingly understanding about the whole situation, especially after the colony's governor had given Mike a commendation for extraordinary service to interspecies relations. An hour later, Mike and Ember were aboard the cargo hauler heading toward the coordinates Captain Park had provided. During the journey, Ember became increasingly agitated, making sounds that Mike had never heard before, and spending long periods staring out the viewports at empty space. What is it, buddy? Mike asked. But Ember could only make more of the urgent chirping sounds. They found Captain Park's ship orbiting a small rocky moon at the edge of the system. The survey team had set up a temporary shelter in a cave where they had found the abandoned hatchlings. When Mike and Ember arrived at the cave, the situation was worse than Captain Park had described. 2 of the hatchlings were unconscious and barely breathing, their small bodies shrunken from dehydration and starvation. The third hatchling was awake but seemed to be staring at something invisible, making soft keening sounds toward empty space. But as soon as Ember entered the cave, everything changed. The third hatchling immediately turned toward them and began making excited chirping sounds identical to the ones Ember had been making during their journey. The 2 unconscious hatchlings stirred and opened their eyes for the first time in days. They are communicating, Dr. Wong said over the communication link from New Terra. She had been monitoring the situation remotely through the survey team's equipment. Ember has developed some kind of long-range empathic ability. He could sense their distress from 2 star systems away. Mike watched in amazement as Ember moved between the 3 sick hatchlings, making soft sounds and gently touching them with his claws. Under his attention, the abandoned creatures began to show signs of recovery, their breathing becoming stronger, and their eyes becoming more alert. It appears that the neural changes in Ember's brain have given him the ability to communicate. With and heal other dragons, Dr. Wong continued. This is completely unprecedented. We may be witnessing the emergence of an entirely new kind of dragon consciousness. Over the following days, Mike and Ember nursed the 3 rescued hatchlings, back to health. Like Ember, they began to show unusual developmental patterns, forming emotional bonds not only with Mike but with the survey team members and Captain Park's crew. When they returned to New Terra Colony, Mike found himself with 4 young dragons, and a reputation that was spreading throughout the galaxy. Requests for help were coming in from dozens of different systems. Reports of abandoned or injured creatures that their own species would not help. Mike looked at his small workshop, which was now home to 4 dragons of varying sizes, and realized that his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. He was no longer just a plumber who had saved one sick creature. He had become something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. Ember, now clearly the leader of the small group, made a complex series of sounds that Mike understood perfectly. There were others out there who needed help, and Ember could sense them across vast distances. They were calling out in pain and abandonment, waiting for someone to care enough to answer. Mike looked at his 4 dragons, then at the stack of distress calls piling up on his communication device, and made his decision. He would need a bigger ship, better equipment, and probably some help from other humans who understood what they were trying to accomplish. But he would answer those calls. He would find the abandoned and forgotten creatures of the galaxy and show them the same compassion he had shown Ember. And maybe, just maybe, he would prove that the universe had room for something better than the cold logic of survival. Ember chirped softly and nuzzled against Mike's hand, and Mike knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A plumber from New Terra Colony and 4 dragons who had learned that love was stronger than instinct, changing the galaxy one rescue at a time. The stars outside his workshop window seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities that had not existed before a human decided that a dying creature's life was worth saving. And across the galaxy, abandoned creatures in dark places lifted their heads and felt for the first time that someone cared whether they lived or died.